should we trust the AI systems to make decisions about what's novel, about what's innovative, about what should be accepted as peer-reviewed research? What is ChatGPT? It is a large language model. This is the number one mistake that people make, is they ask questions as if it's Wikipedia, and then they get incorrect answers and they say, hey, it hallucinates. This is a terrible tool. Well, that's like using a hammer to bake a cake.
Welcome to Insights XChange, the crossroads of ideas and academia. I'm your host, Nikesh Gosalia. Did you know that a recent study found that nearly 30% of researchers have already used AI tools to assist in writing their academic papers? In a recent survey by Nature, over 1,600 researchers revealed growing optimism about AI's potential benefits in science, particularly in speeding up data processing and enabling previously infeasible computations. While AI is transforming many aspects of the research process, this raises intriguing questions about ethics, transparency, and the evolving nature of authorship. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Avi Staiman, the founder and CEO of Academic Language Experts and co-founder of SciWriter.ai. Avi brings over a decade of experience in translation, language services, and author support, helping researchers from diverse backgrounds publish their work in top-tier journals. With a keen interest in the intersection of AI and scholarly publishing, Avi has been at the forefront of innovations that bridge the gap between researchers and publishers. His expertise in empowering ESL authors and promoting responsible AI use in research makes him a perfect fit for today's discussion. Avi is also a successful entrepreneur who's extremely humble and always open to having an interesting conversation. So welcome, Avi.
Thank you so much, Nikesh. And I have to say that I already appreciate this interview because I think almost every interview that I do, I write a bio, I send it, and then it's just read word for word. And the time and thought that you put into actually customizing the bio makes me somewhat emotional. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Avi. And you know, it's always been a pleasure to have a conversation with you. Thank you once again for making time. And I'm sure the listeners are going to really have a great time listening to our conversation. So let's get started then. During the peer review week, there's been a lot of discussions around the role of AI in peer review. From your perspective, how do you see AI contributing positively to the peer review process? And I'm sure there are challenges. So what challenges might arise from integrating AI tools in this area?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I think there's been some really interesting and sometimes even heated debate around the use of AI in peer review and AI in general within the scholarly process as well as within the publishing process. And you generally find people in two camps. You've got the early adopter optimists who are thrilled and excited and want to play around with every tool. And then you've got those negative Nancy naysayers who are skeptical and want us to kind of pump the brakes before we do anything. And I like to think that I fall somewhere in the middle in the sense that I am very much kind of keep myself well informed and also teach others about responsible AI use. But I would say in order to tackle your specific question about AI and peer review, my opinion is that those two terms are actually too big to tackle together, and we need to break them down into their basic components in order to answer that question. So let me try and explain what I mean. Artificial intelligence includes a large swath of intelligences or technologies which can be helpful, they can be destructive, they can support us. They are tools that we have already been using for many years, and also tools that haven't yet been created. And one of my bugaboos, one of my pet peeves is when people talk about AI as one cohesive unit, because it's simply not the case and actually distracts us. So in the same way, it would be hard for me to say, Nikesh, how do you feel about the internet and peer review? It's like, well, the internet's a very big place, right? So are you asking me about PubPeer? Are you asking me about open reviews? Are you asking, right? It's too big of a concept. Same thing goes for peer review, right? When people ask me, well, do I think it's appropriate for peer review? I ask, well, how would you define peer review? When you refer to peer review, you're asking the question of, can it find issues such as with images, right, that a human might not be able to find? Or can it help in, let's say, doing an initial screening to make sure that all the ethics declarations are in line? Or can it detect certain issues of language? My answer would be wholeheartedly yes. and it may even do it better than us humans can do it. However, if when you're asking me the question of can we use AI for peer review, you're asking me, should we trust the AI systems to make decisions about what's novel, about what's innovative, about what should be accepted as peer-reviewed research? My answer would be absolutely not. So I think in order to really tackle the question, we need to up the resolution on our magnifying glass and really understand what these terms mean. And I think in the end of the day, we'll probably come to a reasonable and sensible use cases, which include some aspects of AI for some aspects of peer review. And my guess is that's where we're going to land.
Absolutely. No, I fully agree with you, Avi. I'm sure you've had some conversations. I've done the same as well. I think there was a couple of guys, at least, who I spoke to, and something that stood out for me was that, yes, there was a lot of buzz around AI, and maybe, like you mentioned, the two extremes, somebody who was like extremely positive, everything will be automated, and somebody who said, no way. I think it's, for lack of a better term, I think the dust is settling down a little bit in terms of what it can do and what it can't. And clearly we are seeing that there are areas where it can support us. Maybe there are some gains, there are some efficiencies that we can get. But clearly, the 100% automation that we are all expecting it's just about being possible or not. I don't think, it's the most ideal state as well. And so, yes, there are the interesting developments and conversations that are happening, but that is exactly in line with what I've been hearing from the industry as well, Avi. So, that's a good kind of confirmation of some sorts. I think in the recent Ask the Chefs post on the Scholarly Kitchen blog, you highlighted some concerns publishers have about incorporating AI into their process. Could you elaborate on these concerns and what are the key obstacles publishers see in integrating AI into peer review? And again, how might we address these challenges to potentially unlock the benefits of, say, AI-enhanced feedback?
Yeah. So first of all, in terms of, sentiment, let's call it, around artificial intelligence, I do a lot of trainings around Europe to help universities, publishers, understand how these AI tools work and how they can implement them into their workflows and move that conversation from a conversation of what I like to call 30,000 feet, right? Which is we're going to talk big philosophically about when is AI going to have its own creative intelligence abilities and will AI steal our jobs? And I'm a lot less interested in those questions, although they are fascinating and are good water cooler talk, and actually bring it down to the conversations of, well, what tools are out there today? How can they be used? How can they be used responsibly? And what are researchers actually doing in practice? And that's why you pointed to the Springer Nature poll, which I really loved. There's also one by, I believe, Oxford, published recently, which I highly recommend reading, because I think at the end of the day, we can have all the desires we want as publishers, but really it comes down to what are the researchers actually doing, and they're telling us what they're doing, and we shouldn't turn a blind eye to that. So when I give these trainings, I always start and ask, please give me one word around your feelings around AI, right? How do you, if you have to express it in one word? So last year, I would say the word of 2023 was fear, was concern, was ethics issues, research integrity, and a lot of negatives if we had to kind of categorize it. Whereas 2024, I'm calling it the year of curiosity. Okay. So they've moved past that initial kind of gut instinctual no. And they've said, okay, you're showing me something here. I see the potential, but prove it to me. Or how does it actually work? And I think that's a healthy maturation and development, because I think that even if we decide against using these AI tools, that curiosity and learning and educational program will enrich our decision-making processes. And it'll be interesting to see as we, kind of complete 2024 and head into 2025, whether the words will become development and, breakthrough. And that's yet to be seen. And it'll be interesting kind of how people evolve. In terms of the fear, so let's talk about what are those obstacles, right? What are those problems with artificial intelligence that I think make the publishers reticent or hesitant to kind of, embrace fully? So I would split them into two. I would say one category is technological, whereas the second category is sociological. And I don't know actually which one is the bigger impediment. They're both kind of interesting use cases that we need to consider. So in terms of the technological, I think the main question that's being asked there is, can we trust it? Can we rely on it? Is it accurate? Are we concerned about hallucinations? How do we minimize hallucinations? And those are real legitimate questions. Can it detect novelty? Is it connected with the extant literature to be able to say, well, actually, you've missed out on this paper or that paper, right? Those are not simple challenges to actually overcome from a technological perspective. They're being worked on, right? And I think that there are more publishers that are working behind the scenes that may be willing to admit they're actually working on some of those kinds of solutions. So that's kind of question number one. And I think that the kind of response that I would say to that question is, well, let's test it, right? We're scientists. We're publishing science. Let's test and see. And there's already those experiments going on. I've seen in preprints. I know, big fan of Chris Leonard's newsletter on this topic. He is putting out he's collating some great preprints that are being written on in this field about, well, can we actually get to a quality, both in terms of the rigor and the accuracy of the peer review, as well as, how easy it is to implement or how clear it is. Can machines outdo the humans? So that's kind of, I would call the technological challenge, which I think is a solvable challenge, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily solved yet. And I think that, that's number one. The other side of this coin is a sociological challenge. So first of all let's talk about reputation. For publishers, brand is king. It's critical, right? And I think we all saw, examples of where maybe publishers didn't have a rigorous enough vetting or review process. And it turned out that they had to have dozens, if not thousands of articles retracted. On the flip side, there's a sociological issue that we're dealing with, which is the question of, as a society, as a culture, as a scientific community, do we want to hand off this decision-making process to the AI? And I actually feel quite strongly that in terms of, deciding what's novel, what's a contribution, what's innovative, what's important for society, I think we should actually hold the reins on those questions, because those questions aren't questions that we want to be giving up to the bots, but rather questions about our own identities and who we are and what's important to us. I mean, I think you can track, even in any fields, you can look at the history of the publications and you see that they in certain ways reflect certain technological advancements or cultural developments, which are important beyond the, ivory tower. So I think, that's also kind of a pause where people say, well, if we use AI, we're giving up our authority or giving up our control over the process, which is why I advocate for kind of a middle ground, which is if there are processes that we can prove scientifically can be done at same quality or better by AI tools than we can do ourselves as humans. And we can speed up the process of the publication of science. And we can give better and clearer review and feedback to authors. I'm all for it. Okay. Where I, pump the brakes myself is A, if there are any questions about quality and hallucinations, and B, when there are decision-making processes about what is important science and what's not. Because I think that's something that not only tomorrow or the next day we should be, holding on to as people, but rather others. And the truth is, on a very pragmatic level, I think most reviewers would love to be able to go into a peer review, read the article, be like, hey, listen, I think this is great, contributes to our field, is really impressive. Let's go with it, or the opposite, or no, this is kind of secondary and not important and we'll pass by it. So I actually think it would improve the experience for the reviewers as well if we adopted this kind of approach.
Thanks, Avi. I recently read your article on the Scholarly Kitchen about the lack of sufficient publisher policies regarding authors using AI and its potential threat to research integrity. You made an excellent point about how the AI train has already left the station. And I found it intriguing that while authors aren't required to disclose their use, they must declare every time they use an AI tool. From your perspective, is disclosure always necessary, or are there cases where maybe it's not mentioned? And more importantly, beyond a declaration, should authors be providing more detailed information to enable full transparency and replication of their work? You also mentioned the idea of an AI risk register, which I found particularly interesting. So maybe, after you've responded to the first part, you could expand on the type of risks you see and, how can we address them?
Yeah, for sure. So this is something I've been doing a lot of thinking about over the last few months, and I'm glad that you brought it up. In my role in running an author services company, I get a lot of feedback and hear from a lot of researchers and actually see a lot of reviews that come in through the company where I get a feel for kind of what the policies are. And obviously we've been fielding a lot of questions around, well, can I use AI? If I can use AI, how should I report it? And in what cases, where should I report it within the article? Now, unfortunately, although unsurprisingly, it's a bit chaotic. It's a bit of a Wild West in the sense that not only has every publisher developed their own policies and their own means of reporting, but actually sometimes within publishers, different journals have different rules and regulations, which is a really frustrating experience for authors in a similar way to the fact that, you have 5 different journals and each one has their own style guide. And I think that there are we know the reasons why this happens within our industry, but I do think we should take that author experience into account, at least within our own portfolio, in terms of how the declaration should be made and where it should be made and in what way. But I want to go a level deeper, and I want to ask the question that you asked, which is, should we be actually requiring every single last AI tool to be reported? And the way I think about it, going back to the internet example, is do we need to be declaring, should we declare, if I told you, Nikesh, I want you to declare, I know that you're working on some research now, right? I want you to declare every time you used Google throughout your project. You'd probably look at me like that's crazy, right? And I think AI is going to become so embedded in every single tool that we use that it will literally be impossible for us to declare each and every use case. So for example, if you're using Grammarly today as a researcher, you're using AI. You might not even be aware you're using AI, but you are. And then, I don't think that most publishers would say you have to tell us that you've used Grammarly. Or let's say you used AI to find literature, to do a literature search, literature review. Use one of the great tools out there like Cite or SciSpace or any of those, or our discovery tools. Those are all great tools to help you find research. I don't think the same way. I wouldn't say you would need to credit your librarian who helped you do your literature review. I don't think you need to credit those tools. And what I've landed on is this terminology, which actually is borrowed from the EU and their writing on AI and research, which is differentiation between substantive use and non-substantive use. So not just saying, yes, you declare AI, or no, you don't declare AI, but actually what was the AI used for? So if it's used for something like proofreading, forget it. Like, you're not helping anybody by reporting that. However, if it's used for something like data analysis, and there are great AI tools there for data analysis, but I think the risk there is a little bit higher, or it's a more substantive use. It's more, I would call it inherently part of the heart of what makes your research, then I think the reporting is really critical, and maybe we should even go into more depth in it. So I think we're over-reporting on certain tools and under-reporting on other tools. So for the data analysis tool, for example, I would think we should have to justify. We should be required to justify. So that's why my critique of the publishing industry is saying transparency is great. We all love transparency. It's a good buzzword. In general, we want our companies to be transparent, but transparency only works if there is a value system behind what we're supposed to be being transparent about. And my claim is that we haven't made it clear to authors what our value system is, where we think it's responsible and irresponsible use, and then how you be transparent about those uses. My suggestion for kind of a direction or a step in this direction was, as you mentioned, to adopt what I really love, which is the EU came up with a risk register, not in the scientific context, just in general, around AI tools. They passed this EU AI Act. So what does that act say? It essentially says that not every tool is created equal, and not every tool has the same risks. So what we need to do is actually come up with a risk register, which kind of, I think it has 4 levels of super risky. So for example, in the EU context, personal surveillance is a very, very high risk use of AI. Okay. And that needs to be really highly regulated. It needs to be monitored. It needs to be, the government should be involved. Whereas, again, on the flip side, all the way at the bottom, if I'm using, again, I'll use the example of proofreading my text using AI, I think everyone would agree that's not the same as, personal surveillance. And then, of course, there's a whole range in between. So my recommendation in that article, and I continue to push for this and advocate for it, is that we need to stop talking about AI as one monolithic entity, but that as if, everything is included within it, but rather start thinking about what are those values, right? That research has to be reproducible. There needs to be integrity. It needs to be, we need to take ownership. The authors need to take ownership and responsibility over their research. All of those things that make research what it is stay the same. And then we need to slot in the different tools and say, to what degree does using this tool put that value at risk? And I think if we put it into that framework, then we, can take the first step on the path of actually, putting together a robust process and system around this, but also improving the author experience. And I think the first publishers that do take those steps will be successful. I want to add one more thing about this question, which is fascinating to me, which is the reaction towards use of AI by the publishers or even by the reviewers. So there's a wide spectrum. So for example, in the beginning, science came out and said no AI whatsoever. Now they've since changed their course of path on that, but that was kind of one extreme. And then in the other extreme, you've got the New England Journal of Medicine AI, which says, we want you to use AI. Tell us how you used it. Be creative and experiment. We want to learn more about it. And I've heard that from other publishers as well. And I think that obviously the majority are kind of in this middle area. But what I would say is it's really critical to think about all the stakeholders in this process. And I want to tell you one story, Nikesh, that really drives this home. There was a publisher where the publisher itself allowed certain uses of artificial intelligence, and the author was up forward and transparent and did exactly what they were supposed to do. I don't remember whether it was in the acknowledgments or the method section, not important, but they did exactly as they were told. The author then received a review, which they sent to us just to look at, where the reviewer said, I'm looking at this article, this submission, and it looks okay overall. But because the author said they used AI, I'm going to reject it because that's a shortcut. Okay. Now that's the reviewer's personal kind of approach towards AI. They have their right to their opinion, and that's fine. But because the publisher wasn't clear and explicit enough with what does the declaration mean? What does this transparency mean? The reviewer felt like they had to make a determination about, good, bad, yes, no. And the boomerang effect of that is I think that authors are going to stop declaring, because if authors see that them being honest and transparent actually harms their chances of publication, they're not going to stop using AI tools. They're going to continue using AI tools, but they're going to stop declaring their use of AI tools. So I really think we can't be, we have to be proactive. We can't sit around and wait for these things to develop or sort themselves out. As a publishing community, we need to be on the forefront of educating and also of, putting out guidelines which are proactive vis-a-vis the authors, vis-a-vis the reviewers, vis-a-vis the editorial teams, and all the stakeholders that are involved in our industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. And talking about stakeholders, as we all know, there are so many different stakeholders in our industry. In your opinion, how can we bring together these stakeholders? It could be governments, it could be institutions, researchers, of course. So how do we come together and collaborate on building a unified global framework for AI use?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I wish I had a good answer to that question. I'll tell you about an attempt, okay? An attempt to do this. I can't say whether it's, worked or working or not, but there was a group that called themselves Kangaroo, and I don't remember what that acronym is short for, but it was a group that was started by a professor of medicine at the University of Southern California who said, let's try and put together guidelines and rules and principles around the responsible use of AI in research. And he got together a team of researchers and industry professionals and publishers. And it was really, I have to take my hat off to him. He really, did a very thorough process. And I also contributed to that committee. And unfortunately, all I've seen so far published, and it could be that I'm missing something, but all I've seen so far is one, I believe, either preprint or white paper about, kind of some of the approaches and technologies. This is already a year later. And my fear is that I don't even know that I trust my answers from a year ago because so much has evolved and developed in my thinking. So the issue here is that on the one hand, we want to be comprehensive in terms of including and inviting all the stakeholders. On the other hand, it's a train that's already left the station. So we're all trying to jump on as it's moving high speed. And that creates a lot of issues and problems because this has to be fast. It has to be dynamic. So it could very well be that we need to think a bit smaller and not smaller in terms of, just in terms of the number of the people that are involved and making it a consistent and stable part of people's jobs or appointing certain representatives at every institution, that this will be, what they are focusing on. Because otherwise, if it's kind of added on as an additional task, I worry that it's not really going to move forward. I will say everyone's dealing with this. I mean, it's not just publishers, right? The authors are asking themselves what's allowed, what's not allowed. How can we use it in the best way possible? The funders, right? They get too many submissions every year. So they're asking themselves, how do we use this technology to sort through all the submissions and make our jobs a little bit easier? The universities are asking, is this an opportunity for us to grow and to get more grants? So everyone is grappling, maybe not with the same questions, but they're all grappling with what's responsible and irresponsible implementation and use of AI within their institution. So it should be easier than I think it is because we're all involved in this conversation already. So it's just a matter of bringing this conversation together. No one needs to convince anybody at this point that AI is something we should be considering our institution. Everyone is, but now can we move beyond our institutions and across sectors?
Absolutely, yeah. Before we move on to talk a little bit about the researchers, one question that just came to my mind, Avi, was there is a lot of conversation within the industry and even outside about research integrity. And I know we all are aware there are a lot of initiatives which are running right now. So it could be a body called the ASTM Integrity Hub. It could be a lot of publishers individually or coming together and working. It could be, other organizations, vendors supporting it. But just in your opinion, how do we tackle this issue? I mean, what is potentially a starting point? Because it's sometimes in conversations feels like really overwhelming. And where do you start? Do you look at past data? Do you look at putting some guardrails going forward? How deep do you go into it? You obviously can't wait for an issue to happen. So yeah, I think it's just sometimes when I talk to people, they're very anxious about it. It's kind of fuzzy in their head in terms of what a starting point could be. But just your reflections, your thoughts in terms of, how do we ensure integrity? How do we tackle this issue?
Yeah. So first of all, I kind of, sometimes I'm labeled as a bit of an AI optimist, and I really do mainly speak about the potential of AI to really transform in a positive way. But I'm not blind to the fact that this will make certain issues that already pre-existed, I think, within our industry, so such as paper mills, and fraudulent research, it just makes it that much easier to do, right? That's, kind of the bad actors. But even the good actors, who are under the pressure. So by good actors, I mean researchers who are trying to do the best thing. They are sometimes under a lot of pressure. They need to submit grants and be administrators and teach classes and write articles and, write recommendation letters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Will they use AI to kind of cut corners? I'm sure there is a certain percentage that will, though I don't think that people who are, noble and upstanding are all of a sudden going to become corrupted because of AI. It's a tool. And I think it goes back to, maybe doing kind of a bit of a SWOT analysis of what is it that makes research, right? What are those principles upon which research integrity stands? Again, if it's, reproducibility, maybe we need a greater degree of tracing back to the data sources. Maybe that needs to become a requirement instead of just a nice, add-on. Maybe we need to have a peek or an eye into the lab, right? And whatever form that might take to make sure that the research we're getting is really honest, transparent, reproducible, reviewable, etc. Now, AI tools, they can help that process, they can hurt that process, but they're tools in the end of the day. So I think that, for example, Ithaca has put together a list of all of those different kinds of AI tools. They've categorized them. And I think it would behoove publishers to start asking themselves, what kind of tools are there? What risks do each type of tool present? And then even go as far, I would recommend, is doing some homework and making I would call it an approved list of potential tools that, they encourage their researchers to use, and maybe tools that they would say, we discourage you from using them. And maybe ones in the middle where they would say, understand the risks, understand the potential costs of using these tools. And that could be issued to authors. It could be for their editors and chiefs. It could be, for all the stakeholders. But it involves a lot of education because things are moving ahead so quickly. So I don't think, and obviously there are a bunch of AI integrity tools that have been built and continue to be built using AI to snuff out bad AI, right? So again, it's all in the hands of the user in terms of how it's going to be used. But I don't think that it necessarily makes sense to have, blanket policy across AI use, because again, it's just going to become so common and so ingrained in everything. I'm just thinking about the day that Microsoft rolls out all of the AI capabilities into their main Excel, Word and PowerPoint features, and then it's like, game over, right? There is no more that separation in our minds, which we have, just doesn't exist. So it's easier to be a bad actor nowadays. There's no question about that. And I think each publisher needs to ask themselves, I don't know if this is pun intended, what are those signals, right? I'm thinking of a new startup called Signals. There's also a startup called Clear Skies, which they're really doing some deep dives into these questions. They're asking themselves, what are those telltale signs that there's something nefarious going on here? Because we can't do it on a paper by paper basis, right? We need to do it at scale. And sometimes the approaches are quite different for what you'd first think. You might think, well, we need to come up with a detector to tell whether this is written with AI or not written with AI, and then we'll know if something has research integrity or not. Well, actually, that might not be the best way to do it. It might be that interrogating and investigating the author network and their previous publications and who they're publishing with is a better way of actually finding and rooting out research integrity or research fraud. So I think that where we would actually be barking up the wrong tree, if we try to just continue to create AI detection tools as a means for upholding research integrity. A, because these tools are only going to get better over time and evolve to the point where they can't be detected. And B, because I think most of the people who are using these tools are using them fine, right? So even if we can detect it, that doesn't necessarily mean that anyone's doing anything wrong. So it's just not enough of a telltale sign for us to really approach it in that way. But again, that's kind of my take on things. And I know that there are those in the industry who still kind of feel like AI does present a risk that's going to be hard to beat.
No, thanks for that, Avi. Moving on to talk a little bit about the researchers. So we know that a lot of the non-native speakers of English require quite a bit of support. In your mind, what are the biggest challenges they face in getting their work published? And how can academic institutions and publishers better support them?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of my life's work. And Nikesh, I know it's a big part of your life's work is leveling the playing field. And I know that I come at this from two sides. The first side that I come at it from is from a place of fairness and equality, where we're giving everyone the same shot to get their voices heard. And I think whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were looking at 80, 90% of research, coming from heavily Anglocentric and not even just Anglocentric, right? US, UK, Australia-centric centers. Now there's a lot more diversity. I think we've made some great strides in that way, but obviously we have a lot more to do. And obviously it's a challenge because these researchers who don't have English as their native language, they have to spend more time, they have to spend more money, and it distracts them from other things. There are certain problems, some parts of that we're not really going to be able to solve so long as English is the lingua franca, but we should recognize them and work towards lowering them. And I actually think that one of the things I'm most excited about artificial intelligence is the ability to level the playing field for these researchers. The other side of the coin is just as humanity, as society, as a culture, we want the best research being published. One story that I kind of love to tell is a story of Professor Tu Youyou. And Tu Youyou was a Chinese, I think she's still among the living, if I'm not mistaken. I think she's in her 90s. But she was a professor at the Chinese Academy of Natural Medicine back in the 70s and 80s, where she came across a natural compound called artemisinin. And she quickly realized that this could be used to actually cure malaria, which is incredible. I mean, malaria is a disease that was killing millions of people a year, mainly in Africa, but across the globe. And she published her results. Now, she published them in Chinese. Now, I don't know. I haven't had a conversation with her, although I would pay a lot in order to do so, about why she published it in Chinese. But I can venture to guess that, she didn't have the English resources necessarily. Maybe there was no incentive to publish in English. Maybe it was important for her to publish in her national language. All of those are legitimate. But in the end of the day, what happened is that no one noticed it. I mean, and when I say no one, I mean, other researchers didn't notice it. Pharma companies didn't notice it. And years went by before we actually had a cure for malaria, and we didn't know it, which is just boggles my mind, right? And we're talking about millions of people who could have been saved. And it was only when an American researcher who was doing some sort of, and by the way, how do we know that no one knew about it? Because it didn't get any citations, right? That's the way we know. I think it got one citation maybe. So there was this American researcher who was doing a systematic review, came across and is like, oh my God, right? Like we have to get this out right away. Published it as part of his systematic review. That systematic review has subsequently gotten hundreds, if not thousands of citations, right? Obviously, it's a groundbreaking discovery. And since then, thankfully, I think we as society have made it up to her. I think she won the Nobel Prize at a certain point, and and she's gotten her recognition. Although 99% of researchers that I speak to have never heard of her, so I still think there's more work to be done. But anyway, my point here is that I think there's, science is better off when we hear from everybody, and innovation and medicine and health is better off aside from, issues of equality and fairness. And I think that we should be striving towards that. So in my opinion, it's a win-win to build these tools. In addition, in all the surveys that I've seen, including the Springer Nature one and the Oxford one, whenever researchers are asked, what is it that you're most excited about AI? How are you using it? What is the biggest, kind of gains that you see, at least in the short term? inevitably it's always around language. And it shouldn't come as a surprise to us. These are, what is ChatGPT? It is a large language model. This is the number one mistake that people make is they ask questions as if it's Wikipedia, and then they get incorrect answers and they say, hey, it hallucinates. This is a terrible tool. Well, that's like using a hammer to bake a cake. Like it's not the right tool for the right task. So we need to start thinking about large language models as the language, so which is why it can really do a phenomenal job. Not perfect, and I think that there's still plenty of room for editors in this world, but it can do a great job at an initial translation or cleaning up text or formatting references in ways where it really does finally provide an opportunity for those, English as an additional language researchers to come closer to leveling the playing field. I wouldn't say that it's a level playing field just yet, but I think the gap has shrunk, since November 2022 when ChatGPT was first let out.
Absolutely. By the way, that's a fantastic story that you shared, Avi. I mean, I think for some reason, I think it's been many, many years that I've heard that, and it's such a great reminder, and also for the listeners too. It just hits the message so clearly, stating that, why all of this is important, why we need to really work on fairness, why some of us obviously exist, such good work that is being done, which for a very, very long time was kind of, ignored. And so, thank you so much for sharing that as a story, Avi. Just talking a little bit more about that, how do you see the role of language services evolving in scholarly publishing, particularly with the growing demand for global research collaboration, for multilingual communication? It is definitely much more accepted today. It is almost, requirement. We can't really ignore such good research happening, such good science happening in so many parts of the world. How do you see that role evolving?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. And I think it's a question that also relates to kind of geopolitical considerations, So I'm just thinking of China, right? And China, when the Chinese government decides, we want to be keeping more of our research, local and less, let's call it published in English language journals, that impacts our industry in a very serious and meaningful way. And the flip side, when the Japanese government decides we want to get more involved in English language publishing, that also affects in a very important way. So it's not entirely an internal discussion in that sense. And I think that's something that is important to remind ourselves of in general in science, right? Is that science is here to serve the public and to serve society. And we should never forget that. Obviously, the AI tools are going to make big, I think they're going to make big strides in helping to reduce some of those gaps. It solves a lot of problems. It can create new ones, right? We've all heard of the term hallucination or misinformation. We need to be very, very careful around those issues. The fact that it can write or improve mistakes doesn't necessarily mean it's good writing, okay? Which is also important. Doesn't mean we've conveyed our ideas clearly, succinctly, and in a compelling fashion. I still think there's going to definitely be a role for those language specialists within the community and to help researchers. But I do think it somewhat democratizes that process and allows researchers from around the world to really gain in meaningful ways. The question that I've been asking myself a lot, and I know that, I think me and you have discussed this before, is it just simply that researchers are going to write the same way they've always written, and then they're going to, just use these tools to polish things up and to edit or to, tweak? Or is the entire writing process going to be turned over on its head? Spoiler, I think it's the latter. I think the entire writing process is going to be turned on its head, whereby the research writing process is going to be, you take your data, take maybe some literature that you've done, you throw it into tools that can help you integrate that, and you generate a first draft, again, based on your own information. I'm not talking about, fraudulent research where you're just inventing numbers, but these tools are going to be able to process and analyze and spit out conclusions for you, maybe at a much quicker and better level than you are able to as an individual researcher. And then the researcher's role is going to flip on its head, and we're all going to become a reviewer too of our own papers. That's how I envision it happening, and I already see it happening a little bit, which is, again, it doesn't mean that we're not taking an active part of the research, right? There's no AI replacement for a lab, at least, that I know of in the meantime. But there are examples. One good example is data to paper. So if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend, Googling data to paper. Two researchers at the Technion Institute in Israel who asked themselves, can we actually automate the entire process from data analysis to data writing to, writing up the sections of our paper in an automated way and peer review to actually produce a legitimate real article. I'm not talking about a fraudulent article. And it wasn't simple. It was a complicated process, but they were able to do that. And that's a tool that's now available, open to other researchers who want to experiment and play around. Now, I don't think that our goal, and I don't think that we're close technologically to just doing that for all of research, right? Just automating the process. Although there are big players. I don't know if you saw this, Nikesh, this Sakana.ai, which announced its foray into the scene that got $100 million from OpenAI. So who knows, right? Maybe we are on the verge of this automated research. What I think is, at least in this interim transformative period, what will happen is that we will start doing there's going to be more and more generative writing. And then again, the researcher is going to play that role of, does this make sense? How do I want to tweak it? How do I want to perfect it? Where do I want to put in the emphasis as opposed to other things? And that will change. That will change how research is read, how research is analyzed, is processed. And I think it's the job of the innovators to push the limits, and it's the job of the integrity specialists to pump the brakes. And hopefully, if those conversations are happening between them, that we can find a healthy, responsible, middle ground, which pushes innovation forward, but also make sure that it's being done responsibly as we do it.
Fascinating. That again was a brilliant response and just so clearly explained. And I think my view remains the same, Avi. I think, that is what we will see in the immediate future. I mean, never say never, like you said. Things could really move very quickly as well. But I think that is what we might, see in the next foreseeable future. Just last couple of questions, Avi. Yeah. Do you, in your personal opinion, believe, if this is the year of curiosity, like you said, next year is going to be the year of development, or do you think, we still have some time to go, things are still evolving, there's going to be time taken to test out a few things, make improvements, think about deployment. Yeah. So just, how do you see the next, say, 12 months panning out?
I do think it's going to be the year of development, but I'm not sure that we will see necessarily the products of that development, right away, or there may be products that are in their alpha and beta phases. And I think that we get, in today's generation, we're a bit spoiled that we expect products to be perfect on their release. And anyone who's actually spent time building a product realizes that's a damn hard thing to do, right? As any product person will tell you. What I always think of in my mind is, for those who are old enough, is to take us back to that. I remember that first time that I was sitting in my dad's office and watching a first internet page come up, right? So I had to type in the entire address. Then we had to, obviously you had to connect the modem and for it to make that call and wait for that to connect. And then the page would slowly but surely appear on the screen. And after 10 minutes, you'd have this internet page, right? Now, looking back on that, at that time, I could have easily been like, oh, give me a break. This takes forever. I have my ways of working. It's not really going to help, right? So we could, and I think we're further along maybe in the AI process, but there are certain tools where, because it doesn't work exactly the way that we want it to, or because we don't understand how to use it properly, we're a bit dismissive. And my recommendation and suggestion, what I always tell people is, whenever day it is that you're listening to this, whether it's right after it's published or 3 years from now, this will be the worst day in history for AI, meaning AI will only get better from today forward, unless it gets to the point where it's just takes over our lives, right? But it will always get better and better and better. And I think in the same way that back then I would have recommended, follow this internet thing because it actually could do, it could be pretty important in your personal life, in your professional life. I would recommend doing the same thing here. And my recommendation to people is always have AI in the room with you. So what I mean by that is you don't always need to, use AI. You don't always need to listen to AI, even if you did decide. But you should get used to being in this habit where you ask yourself, the activity that I'm doing now, especially for those activities that you don't like, for those activities that are the bottlenecks that are holding you back, is there a way that we can solve a particular problem that we have within our workflow using AI? Now, the answer might sometimes be no, but that question, I think at this point is most important. And I do think that as people are more and more exposed to these technologies, they get more and more optimistic. And I know that because when I do these trainings, a lot of times I always ask people for the word at the beginning, and sometimes they'll say skeptical or concerned. And when I show them actual real tools that work for real use cases, okay, just take, I don't know, Gamma is a great example. Okay. And I don't get any cut from them. So, this isn't an advertisement, but you put in a very simple prompt and you get out a beautiful PowerPoint. Beautiful. Now, I always edit that PowerPoint. I always change around pictures, but that tool, without any hard work whatsoever, saves me probably on average 5 to 10 hours a month that I can now dedicate to things that I want to do, right? And I think that that's kind of the mentality that I want people to adopt is it doesn't need to be a pro or against. It doesn't need to be adoption or rejection. It can also be, we can, kind of run with this curiosity exploration phase for a little while. Also because the tools themselves are still in this curiosity, exploration phase. And we'll learn soon enough which tools we want to adopt as part of our workflow, which tools are fun for, maybe recreational purposes, but we're not going to use at work, and which tools actually can make a big, impactful difference on our day-to-day work.
Fantastic. Just for the benefit of our listeners, Avi, how do you keep yourself updated about the industry? I mean, I know the response, but, just for the benefit of the listeners.
That's a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that question because it's a mix. Okay, so it's a mixed bag. First of all, is last year, or let's go back to November 2022, right? ChatGPT comes out. I use it for the first time, and I'm like, wow, right? My jaw drops, and I say, I see all the problems. I see there's issues, but like this is going to change my industry. This is going to change publishing, right? And I was well aware of that. So there was a month there where I was like just in shock and awe and was like, I don't know what to do with myself. And then after I got over that, I said, okay, I guess I have to learn, right? Anytime like we don't know, we should learn. We should educate ourselves. So what I did was I put together this course called AI Tool Up Tuesdays, which Cactus was a part of and was great, where I invited the builders of these tools. If anyone here has ever come across a Proofig or Site or SciSpace, all these tools, I just invited the entrepreneurs to come. I brought a group of researchers. By the time we were all said and done, it was 5,000 researchers who signed up for this course. It was a free course. And we learned together. I mean, like I was learning alongside everybody else. The only contribution that I made was just pulling these people together into the same, so-called room. It was a webinar series, still accessible to anyone who wants to go on and check it out. And so that was my first stage of learning. At this point, there are dedicated communities, whether it's on WhatsApp or on LinkedIn. I try to post on LinkedIn to try and stir and generate conversation around the use of these tools and keep myself updated. So I've subscribed to some of the main tools that I like and enjoy, subscribe to their updates and emails. I'll attend webinars myself. But at this point, I think I've kind of, passed maybe what we'd call the mean or the medium, user. And I do give over these tools myself. But what I love, so I do what are called boot camps. So I will come into an institution and I'll the reason I call it a boot camp and not just a regular workshop is because a workshop, people expect, everything about this field and you're the expert and you're just going to come teach us. Whereas a boot camp, my approach is, I know a lot. I probably know more than the majority of the people who are sitting there. That's the reason I'm there. But I learned a ton from these workshops where I'm teaching it. A, because whenever you teach something, you need to, learn about it in depth because you get all sorts of questions. But B, because sometimes the participants have actually found a use and a creative way of using it that I had never thought of. So I'm constantly learning in that way as well. But I guess my takeaway message, at least in terms of this context, is that I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not a techie at all. I'm not an AI, expert in the sense of being able to tell you exactly how the texts are chunked or the algorithms are processed, but yet I still can use the tools in a very powerful, impactful way. And another way of saying this is that what artificial intelligence has done is it's democratized coding in a very simplistic way. I can use my own language when I want to create something. So for anyone who maybe has tinkered a little bit but hasn't really dove straight in, or for anyone who is too scared to try it, first of all, it's never too late. We're still very early days. We're still in that internet page loading timeframe. And second of all, it's simpler than you think. It really is simpler than you think. You don't need to be some expert, and that's the beauty of it. So I do encourage everyone to get out there and play around. And again, your conclusion that you may come to with some of these tools is absolutely not, right? We will not include, you may go out there and I think I respect if you're a publisher, right? And you say, I'm going to go and I'm going to give it a fair shot and I'm going to try out AI. I'm going to see how it works. And you say, this is not mature enough. That is perfectly legitimate conclusion to come to. What's not a legitimate conclusion to come to in my mind is to say, I'm going to ignore this technology because I don't know, I philosophically disagree with it, or I don't believe in it, or I've heard rumors X, Y, and Z, and then come to conclusions based on that. So get your hands dirty, play around, experiment, and then make informed decisions.
Fantastic. It's been such an informative discussion with Avi Staiman today. We've talked about the transformative role of AI in scholarly publishing, examining both its potential benefits and the ethical considerations it brings. We've also spoken about a few very interesting stories that Avi shared and his own personal experience and journey in understanding the AI technology first, and then, how can we implement this and also share it with the larger audience. So big thank you to you, Avi, for sharing all of your invaluable insights. And I highly recommend all the listeners to listen to this episode. It's been fantastic for me to have this conversation. And every time I speak to you, Avi, there's always something or the other which I go back and reflect on. So thank you once again.
Thanks, Nikesh. I'm honored to be on the Insights XChange. I'm a loyal listener, and I see, as someone who does a decent amount of podcasts, I see the effort and time and thoughtfulness that's put into that. And I think it starts with, your own humility and the kind of humility of those around you. And I learn a lot from these exchanges and interchanges. And I look forward to continuing our conversations, which are mutually beneficial and I think hopefully enrich the conversation.
Thank you. That's very kind of you, Avi. In our next episode, we'll talk to Elisa Grimshaw from Yale University. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Keep tuning into Insights XChange, and we look forward to bringing you more engaging conversations that challenge the norms of academic research. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge.